The morning sun cast long shadows across Terra Prime Military Academy as three alien shuttles descended from the sky. The ships landed with silent grace on the Academy's main parade ground. Commander Vexthal stepped out first, his tall blue frame moving with careful dignity. His uniform was white and silver, marking him as a high-ranking officer of the Galactic Federation. Behind him came Lieutenant Corvin, a shorter alien with green skin and 4 arms. His job was to record everything and help the commander. The third alien was Dr. Nylarex, whose purple skin and large eyes showed she belonged to a species known for studying other life forms. She carried several strange devices to measure and test things. Director General Marcus Webb waited for them at the landing area. He was a tall man with gray hair and many medals on his chest. His face was serious but welcoming. Next to him stood Colonel Rita Hayes, a woman with short brown hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. Major Tom Rivers completed the greeting party. He was younger than the others, with broad shoulders and hands that looked like they had seen real fighting. "Welcome to Terra Prime Military Academy," Director Webb said, stepping forward. "We are honored to have the Galactic Federation visit our facility." Commander Vexthal nodded slowly. His voice had a strange musical quality when he spoke. "Thank you for allowing this assessment. The Federation needs to understand human military capabilities before we consider your species for membership." The alien commander looked around the Academy grounds. He saw young humans in uniform running in. Perfect lines. Their faces were hard and focused. Their movements were sharp and exact. To Vexthal they looked like children playing at being soldiers. "Your cadets seem very enthusiastic," Dr. Nylarex said, watching a group of human students march past. They moved as one unit, their boots hitting the ground at exactly the same time. "They take their training seriously," Colonel Hayes replied. "Would you like to see them in action?" The alien delegation followed their human guides across the Academy campus. The buildings were made of gray stone and metal. Everything looked functional and strong. There were no decorations or pretty things anywhere. Even the trees were planted in straight rows. As they walked, Lieutenant Corvin noticed something strange. The human students they passed all had the same look in their eyes. It was not fear or respect. It was something harder to understand. They looked at the aliens with curiosity, but also with a kind of measuring stare, as if they were thinking about how to fight them. "How long do your students train here?" Commander Vexthal asked. 4 years for basic officer training, Major," Rivers answered. "But many of our cadets have been preparing for military service since they were children. Some come from military families going back many generations." This surprised Dr. Nylarex. In most Federation species, military service was a job like any other. Families did not pass down fighting traditions for hundreds of years. They arrived at a large open field, where a group of cadets was training. The instructor was Sergeant Leo Kane, a man with scars on his arms and a voice that could be heard across the entire field. He was teaching hand-to-hand combat to about 30 young humans. "Today we practice close combat without weapons," Sergeant Kane announced. "Remember, in real fighting you might lose your gun or knife. Your body is your last weapon and it should be your best weapon." The alien visitors watched as the human cadets paired up and began fighting each other. But this was not the gentle sparring that Federation species used for training. These humans hit each other with real force. They threw each other to the ground. They used elbows and knees and even their heads as weapons. One cadet, Jake Morrison, was fighting with Elena Rodriguez. Jake was bigger and stronger, but Elena was faster. When Jake tried to grab her, she twisted away and hit him hard in the ribs. Jake doubled over, but immediately came back with a punch toward her face. Elena ducked and swept his legs, sending him crashing to the ground. "Excellent work, Rodriguez," Sergeant Kane called out. "You used his strength against him." Morrison. "Get up, you telegraph your punches too much." Commander Vexthal found himself stepping back. In the Federation military, training was about learning to use advanced weapons and technology. Soldiers rarely needed to use their bare hands to fight. The idea of deliberately hurting fellow soldiers during practice seemed barbaric. Are they not concerned about injury? Dr. Nailarex whispered to her companions. Minor injuries are part of learning, Colonel Hayes said, overhearing the question. How can they know their limits if they never test them? The training continued with weapon practice. Sergeant Kane brought out what he called training rifles. The alien delegation expected to see simple practice weapons like the light beam. Trainers used by Federation forces. Instead, the humans carried weapons that looked deadly. They were made of black metal and wood. They had sharp edges and heavy barrels. When the cadets aimed them, their faces became completely focused and calm. These are replica assault rifles, Major Rivers explained. They fire training rounds instead of live ammunition, but they still teach proper handling and respect for weapons. Cadet David Park stepped up to the firing line. He was a quiet student with steady hands. He raised his rifle, took aim at a target 300 meters away, and fired. The sound was much louder than the aliens expected. It was not the soft humming of Federation energy weapons. It was a sharp crack that made the ground shake slightly. The training round hit the target dead center. But what shocked the alien visitors was what happened next. The target, which was made of thick metal, had a dent in it. A deep, obvious dent. Impressive accuracy, Commander Vexthal said, but his voice had a nervous edge. Park is one of our best marksmen, Colonel Hayes said with pride. He can hit targets at over 800 meters with iron sights alone. Dr. Nailarex scanned the training round with one of her devices. Her face changed color when she read the results. The projectile had hit with enough force to penetrate most Federation body armor. And this was just a training round. What kind of force do your actual combat weapons generate? She asked quietly. About 3 times more than what you just saw, Sergeant Kane answered casually, as if he was talking about the weather. The alien delegation watched more demonstrations. They saw cadets learning to operate in complete darkness using only their natural senses. They watched humans practice fighting while wounded, with fake injuries that would disable most Federation species completely, but the most disturbing thing was how the human cadets talked about their training. They did not complain about the hard work or the pain. They seemed to enjoy pushing themselves to their limits. They competed with each other to see who could endure more difficulty. Why do they seem to enjoy such harsh training? Lieutenant Corvin asked Director Webb. The human commander thought for a moment before answering. Because they understand that their enemies will not be gentle with them. Every drop of sweat in training might save their lives in real combat. As the morning ended, Commander Vexthal realized this visit was going to be very different from what he had expected. These humans were not the primitive species the Federation had imagined. They were something else entirely. Something that had learned to turn violence into an art form. The alien commander looked at his notes and then at the human cadets still training in the distance. For the first time in his long military career, he felt a chill of genuine concern about what he might discover next. After lunch, the alien delegation was taken to the Academy's main lecture hall. The room was large and filled with rows of seats facing a big screen at the front. Human cadets filled most of the seats, their uniforms neat and their attention focused forward. The alien visitors were given special seats in the front row. Professor Amanda Cross walked to the front of the room. She was a middle-aged woman with graying hair pulled back in a tight bun. Her clothes were simple but professional. She had been teaching military history at the Academy for 15 years. Her voice was clear and strong when she spoke. Today we will review the evolution of human warfare, she announced to the class. Our guests from the Galactic Federation will learn how humanity developed its military traditions. Commander Vexthal settled into his chair, expecting a boring academic presentation. Most Federation species had simple military histories. They learned to fight when they discovered space travel. Before that, they lived in peace on their homeworlds. Professor Cross pressed a button, and the big screen showed a picture of early humans. They were covered in animal fur and carrying wooden spears. They looked primitive and weak. Human warfare began over 1 million years ago, Professor Cross said. Our ancestors fought with sticks and stones. They learned that the tribe that fought better survived. The tribes that fought poorly died out. Dr. Nylarex made notes on her device. This was already different from other species. Most Federation members had no history of conflict before they developed advanced technology. The screen changed to show ancient battles. Thousands of humans with metal swords and shields crashed into each other. The pictures showed blood and death everywhere. Bodies covered the ground like fallen leaves. The Battle of Thermopylae, Professor Cross continued. 300 Spartan warriors held off tens of thousands of Persian soldiers. They knew they would die, but they fought anyway. This taught us that small numbers of well-trained soldiers could defeat much larger forces. Lieutenant Corvin shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The pictures were violent and disturbing. In Federation military history, battles were usually decided by technology, not by soldiers willing to die. The presentation moved forward in time. The screen showed Roman legions marching in perfect formation. They carried matching weapons and wore identical armor. Their faces were hard and determined. The Romans conquered most of their known world, Professor Cross explained. They won because they were organized and disciplined. They also won because they were completely ruthless with their enemies. When a city rebelled against Rome, the Romans would sometimes kill every person in that city as a warning to others. Commander Vexthel felt his stomach turn. The Federation had rules about warfare. Civilians were never supposed to be harmed. The idea of killing entire cities was horrifying. The history lesson continued through the centuries. Medieval knights fought with heavy armor and sharp swords. The screen showed massive battles where tens of thousands of humans killed each other. For land or religion or honor. Professor Cross showed them pictures of castle sieges that lasted for months. Armies would surround cities and let the people inside starve to death. Sometimes they would catapult dead bodies over the walls to spread disease. The siege of Constantinople lasted 57 days, she said calmly. By the end, people inside the city were eating rats and leather boots to survive. Dr. Nylarex stopped taking notes. Her hands were shaking slightly. A casual way the human professor talked about such horrors was almost as disturbing as the horrors themselves. The presentation moved to more recent times. The screen showed the first guns and cannons. Humans in bright uniforms stood in long lines and shot at each other across open fields. The weapons made loud noises and filled the air with smoke. Gunpowder changed everything, Professor Cross said. Now humans could kill each other from much farther away. Wars became bigger and deadlier. She showed them the American Civil War. Brother fought against brother. Entire families were destroyed. The pictures showed battlefields covered with so many dead bodies that you could walk across them without touching the ground. Over 600,000 Americans died in this war, the professor said. They were fighting about slavery and states' rights, but the important military lesson is how they used industrial production to make weapons. For the first time, factories were as important as soldiers. Commander Vexthel leaned forward. This was becoming more disturbing with each passing minute. These humans had been killing each other with increasing efficiency for thousands of years, and they seemed proud of it. The screen changed to show the First World War. The aliens saw pictures of long trenches filled with mud and dead soldiers. Poison gas drifted across battlefields like green fog. Men wore masks that made them look like monsters. World War I killed over 16 million people, Professor Cross continued. Humans learned to use chemistry as a weapon. They made gases that would burn your lungs and blind your eyes. They also learned that modern weapons could kill so many people so quickly that traditional tactics no longer worked. A cadet raised her hand. It was Emma Brooks, a senior student with short blonde hair and intelligent eyes. Professor Cross, how did the use of poison gas change military thinking? Excellent question, Brooks, the professor replied. It taught us that any substance could become a weapon if you used it correctly. Water, air, even food could be turned into tools of war. This thinking led to much more creative approaches to combat. Lieutenant Corvin whispered to Dr. Nylarex, They weaponized their own atmosphere. The presentation moved to World War II. The screen showed massive battles with thousands of tanks and airplanes. Cities were bombed until nothing was left but rubble. Millions of people died in concentration camps. The Second World War killed over 70 million humans, Professor Cross said. This war taught us about total warfare. Everything became a target: factories, farms, cities, civilians. The goal was not just to defeat the enemy army, but to destroy the enemy's ability to fight. The most shocking part came when she showed pictures of the atomic bombs. Entire cities disappeared in flashes of light. The aliens watched in horror as the screen showed the shadows of people burned into walls by the nuclear fire. The atomic bomb ended the war quickly, Professor Cross explained. But it also taught us that humans had created weapons that could destroy their own planet. This was the first time in history that a species had the power to make itself extinct. Commander Vexthal felt cold sweat on his forehead. No Federation species had ever developed weapons that could destroy their own world. The idea was unthinkable. The presentation showed more recent conflicts. Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan. The weapons became more precise and deadly. Humans learned to fight in jungles, deserts, and cities. They adapted to any environment and any enemy. Professor Cross clicked to her final slide. It showed a timeline of human warfare from the Stone Age to the present day. The line went straight up, showing how quickly humans had learned to kill more efficiently. What you have seen today is just a brief overview, she said to the class and the alien visitors. Human military history shows us one clear pattern. We learn from every conflict. We adapt to every challenge. We never make the same mistake twice. She looked directly at the alien delegation. Of course, everything I have shown you today represents only our conventional warfare history. Tomorrow we will discuss some of our more advanced capabilities. The room fell silent. Commander Vexthal stared at the screen, trying to process what he had just learned. In just 1 hour, he had seen evidence of a species that had spent its entire existence learning how to kill more effectively. And the professor had just suggested that there were even worse things they had not yet discussed. Dr. Nylarex closed her note-taking device. Her hands were still shaking. The next morning, the alien delegation was led to a different part of the academy. This building was smaller and quieter than the others. The windows were covered with dark glass so no one could see inside. A sign by the door read Psychological Operations Division. Captain Beth Foster met them at the entrance. She was a woman in her 30s with dark hair and calm eyes that seemed to see everything. When she smiled, it did not reach her eyes. Her voice was soft and friendly, but something about her made Commander Vexthal feel uncomfortable. "Welcome to our Psychological Warfare Training Center," Captain Foster said. "Here we teach our cadets how to win battles without firing a single shot." The aliens followed her down a long hallway. The walls were painted white, and there were no decorations anywhere. Their footsteps echoed in the empty corridor. Lieutenant Corvin noticed that some of the doors they passed had no handles on the outside. "What exactly is psychological warfare?" Dr. Nylarex asked. "It is the art of breaking your enemy's mind before you break their body," Captain Foster replied. "A frightened enemy makes mistakes. A confused enemy fights his own allies. A hopeless enemy surrenders without fighting." They entered a large room that looked like a classroom. But instead of normal desks, there were tables with strange equipment on them. Some tables had recording devices. Others had screens showing pictures of different alien species. One table had what looked like torture devices, though Captain Foster called them interrogation tools. "Today, our cadets are learning advanced questioning techniques," she explained. "Ryan Turner, would you please demonstrate?" A young man with short brown hair stood up. He was tall and thin, with intelligent eyes. Next to him sat another cadet, Maya Singh, who had dark skin and wore a blindfold over her eyes. "Singh is playing the role of a captured enemy spy, Captain," Foster told the alien visitors. "Turner must get information from her without using physical force." Ryan Turner began to speak to Maya in a gentle voice. I know you are tired and scared. You have been away from home for a long time. Your family must be worried about you. Maya said nothing, but her shoulders tensed slightly. We found letters in your pocket, Turner continued, though there were no letters. Love letters from someone named David. He writes about your daughter. She's only 6 years old, is she not? What do you think will happen to her if you never come home? Maya's breathing became faster. Her hands started to shake, even though she knew this was just practice. We could help you get back to her, Turner said, his voice full of false kindness. All we need is the location of your base. Just draw us a simple map. Then you can go home to your little girl. Dr. Nylarex watched in horror as Maya Singh began to cry. Even though this was just training, the human cadet was showing real emotional pain. The psychological pressure was working. Stop, Maya finally whispered. The base is in the northern mountains. Grid reference 47 Alpha. Excellent work, both of you, Captain Foster said. Turner, you found her weakness in less than 5 minutes. Singh, your resistance lasted longer than most. Enemies would in real situations. Commander Vexthal felt sick. In Federation military training, prisoners were treated with respect and dignity. The idea of deliberately causing emotional pain was considered barbaric. How do you teach your soldiers to do such things? He asked. Practice, Captain Foster answered simply. We also use scientific research about fear, stress, and human psychology. Our cadets study how different species think and what they value most. Then they learn to use that knowledge as a weapon. She led them to another part of the room where 3 cadets were working with a computer program. The screen showed a map of a city with different colored areas marked on it. Alex Chun, please explain your project, Captain Foster said. A young man with Asian features looked up from the computer. We are planning a psychological campaign against an enemy city. Instead of bombing buildings, we would spread rumors and false information to make the people panic. He pointed to different areas on the map. First, we would cut power to some neighborhoods, but not others. This creates confusion and jealousy. Then we would broadcast fake news about food shortages. People would start hoarding supplies and fighting with their neighbors. Next, we would send false evacuation orders to some areas, Chun continued. Half the population would try to leave, while the other half would try to stay. The roads would become blocked with traffic. Emergency services would stop working. Finally, we would spread rumors that the government was planning to surrender, Chun finished. But we would make sure different people heard different versions of the rumor. Soon no one would trust anyone else. The city would destroy itself, without us firing a single weapon. Lieutenant Corvin stared at the young human. Chun had just described how to break an entire civilization using nothing but lies and confusion. And he had done it with the same calm attitude someone might use to discuss the weather. Captain Foster moved them to the next demonstration. Here, a group of cadets was practicing something she called intimidation techniques. They were learning how to make prisoners feel hopeless and afraid without touching them. The key is to understand what each species fears most, explained Cadet Emma Brooks. She was a senior student with blonde hair and sharp green eyes. Some species fear pain, others fear death, but almost all intelligent species fear being forgotten or having their loved ones suffer. She demonstrated on a volunteer cadet who was pretending to be a prisoner. Without raising her voice or making any threats, Brooks managed to make the volunteer look genuinely frightened. She did this by asking questions about his family and suggesting that terrible things might happen to them. You understand that your silence helps no one, Brooks said in a quiet, reasonable voice. Your commanders have probably already replaced you. Your family thinks you are dead. Even if you resist us for years, you will still be forgotten. But if you help us now, we can make sure your family knows you died as a hero. The volunteer cadet, Mark Wilson, actually started to sweat. Even though he knew this was just practice, the psychological pressure felt real. Dr. Nylarex could not understand how these young humans could be so cruel to their own friends during training. In Federation military schools, students supported each other. They did not practice breaking each other's minds. Captain Foster showed them recordings of real interrogations from human history. The aliens watched as human interrogators used family photos, personal letters, and knowledge of the prisoner's culture to cause emotional breakdown. The humans never used physical torture, but they were incredibly effective at causing mental anguish. Psychological pressure is often more effective than physical pain, Captain Foster explained. Physical wounds heal. Mental wounds can last forever. A person who has been broken psychologically may never trust their own judgment again. The aliens learned about propaganda techniques that humans had developed. They saw examples of how humans could take true information and present it in ways that made people believe lies. They learned about psychological operations that had caused entire armies to surrender without fighting. One of the most disturbing demonstrations involved something called Stockholm Syndrome. Captain Foster explained how human interrogators could sometimes make prisoners actually like their captors and want to help them. The human mind has many weaknesses, she said. If you understand those weaknesses, you can control how people think and feel. This makes psychological warfare one of our most powerful tools. Commander Vextel realized that humans had turned their own psychology into a weapon. They had studied their own minds so carefully that they knew exactly how to break other minds. It was brilliant and terrifying at the same time. As the demonstration ended, Captain Foster gathered her students around her. Remember, she told them, the goal of psychological warfare is not just to defeat the enemy. It is to make them defeat themselves. The greatest victory is when your enemy destroys their own will to fight. The alien delegation left the psychological operations building in silence. Commander Vextel found himself looking at the human cadets differently now. These young people looked normal and friendly, but they had just learned techniques that could break entire civilizations without firing a shot. Dr. Nylarex checked her notes and realized something disturbing. Every technique they had seen was designed to work on any intelligent species. The humans had not just learned to fight other humans. They had learned to fight anyone. The afternoon brought the alien delegation to the most secure part of the academy. Dr. Samuel Torres, head of military innovation, met them at a checkpoint guarded by armed soldiers. He was a man in his 50s with wild gray hair and clothes that looked like he had slept in them. His eyes were bright with the kind of excitement that made people nervous. "Welcome to our Research and Development Division," Dr. Torres said as he led them through multiple security doors. "This is where we solve the impossible problems." The first laboratory they entered was filled with strange machines and half-built weapons. Human cadets worked alongside professional scientists, building devices that looked like they came from science fiction movies. The air smelled of metal and chemicals. "The key to human military success," Dr. Torres explained, "is that we never accept limitations. When someone tells us something cannot be done, we find a way to do it anyway." He stopped at a workbench where a young woman was assembling what looked like a normal rifle, but when she demonstrated it, the weapon began changing shape. The barrel extended and the stock adjusted itself automatically. "This is adaptive weaponry," the scientist said proudly. "The gun learns from each shot and adjusts itself for better accuracy. It can change from a sniper rifle to an assault weapon to a shotgun, all based on what the situation requires." Cadet Jessica Liu, who was working on the weapon, looked up at the alien visitors. "The really interesting part is that it learns from the enemy too. If someone is wearing armor, the gun figures out the best way to penetrate it. If they are moving fast, it calculates how to track them." Commander Vexful examined the weapon more closely. Federation technology was advanced, but it was designed by committees and built in factories. This human weapon looked like it had been created by someone who expected to face impossible odds and needed every advantage possible. Dr. Torres led them to the next section, where cadets were testing armor that seemed alive. The material moved and shifted like liquid metal, but it was clearly solid enough to stop bullets. "Reactive defense systems," explained Cadet Robert Thompson, a tall young man with serious eyes. "The armor becomes stronger when it is hit. Each impact teaches it how to defend better against the next attack. He demonstrated by firing a training weapon at a piece of the armor. The first shot made a small dent. The second shot bounced off completely. By the third shot, the armor had become so hard that the bullet shattered against it. How does it know what kind of attack is coming? Dr. Nylarex asked, fascinated despite her growing fear. It does not know, Thompson replied. It prepares for everything. Heat, cold, impact, energy, chemical attack, biological weapons. The armor assumes that whatever hurt it before will hurt it again, but worse, Lieutenant Corvin realized what this meant. Human defensive technology was built on the assumption that enemies would always escalate. They expected every fight to get more dangerous. So they prepared for threats that did not even exist yet. The next level contained communication equipment that looked impossibly complex. Wires and circuits covered every surface. Multiple screens showed maps, data streams, and video feeds from around the world. Redundant communication systems, Dr. Torres said with obvious pride. These networks can function even after 90% of them are destroyed. Cadet James Park, who was monitoring the systems, explained further. Traditional military communication fails when the enemy cuts your main lines. Our system works differently. Every device can talk to every other device. If you destroy half of them, the other half gets stronger and smarter. He showed them how the system worked by deliberately breaking several components. Instead of failing, the network simply routed around the damage and continued operating normally. We designed this assuming that our enemies would be more advanced than us, Park continued. So we built it to work even when they cut our satellite links, jam our radio signals, and destroy our command centers. Commander Vextel felt a chill. These humans were not just preparing to fight enemies who were equal to them. They were preparing to fight enemies who were much more powerful and technologically advanced. Dr. Torres led them to the biological research section. Here, Dr. Lisa Wang was working with samples of plants, bacteria, and other life forms. But she was not studying them for medical purposes. She was studying them as potential weapons. Nature is the ultimate weapons designer, Dr. Huang explained to the alien visitors. Every living thing has evolved ways to attack, defend, or survive. We just learn from their techniques. She showed them bacteria that had been modified to eat metal. These could destroy enemy equipment in days, she said casually. We also have organisms that can survive in space, underwater, or in extreme heat. Imagine releasing them on an enemy planet. Dr. Nylarex backed away from the samples. The idea of using life itself as a weapon was horrible to most Federation species. They saw biological warfare as an attack on the very concept of existence. Of course, we also developed defenses against biological weapons, Dr. Huang continued. We assume that any enemy creative enough to use biology against us would also be creative enough to make very dangerous biological weapons, the tour continued. To the engineering section, where cadets were working on projects that seemed impossible, one group was building a device that could launch objects into space using only electromagnetic fields. Another was working on weather control systems. Kinetic bombardment, explained Major Rivers, who had joined the tour. You put metal rods in orbit around a planet. When you need to attack something, you drop the rods. They hit the ground with the force of nuclear weapons, but they are not nuclear weapons, so no one can complain about treaties. Commander Vextel stared at the demonstration model. The humans had found a way to turn simple metal bars into planet-killing weapons by using gravity and orbital mechanics. The most disturbing project was being worked on by a senior cadet named David Park. His workstation was covered with mining equipment, industrial tools, and construction materials. But he was not building anything normal with them. This is a theoretical exercise, Dr. Torres explained quickly when he saw the aliens' expressions. Park is demonstrating how common civilian equipment could be weaponized in an emergency. Park looked up from his work. He was a quiet student with steady hands and frightening intelligence. The assignment was to design a planetary defense system using only equipment that any mining colony would have. He said his design used mining explosives, construction vehicles, and/or processing equipment to create a weapon that could destroy entire fleets of spaceships. The most terrifying part was how simple it was. Any human colony could build it in a few weeks. "We call this improvised warfare," Dr. Torres said. "Humans excel at turning everyday objects into weapons. A farmer's fertilizer becomes explosives. A factory's chemicals become poison gas. A power plant becomes a massive bomb." Dr. Nylarex looked around the laboratory with new understanding. These humans were not just good at using advanced weapons. They were good at making weapons out of anything they could find. Every tool, every machine, every substance could become a weapon in human hands. The final demonstration involved something called contingency planning. The cadets showed the aliens thick books filled with detailed plans for fighting enemies they had never met, using weapons that did not exist in situations that might never happen. "We plan for everything," Major Rivers explained. "Invasion by more advanced species, fighting while cut off from supply lines, combat in zero gravity, warfare on planets with different atmospheres, battle against enemies who are bigger, stronger, faster, or smarter than us." One particularly thick manual was labeled Asymmetric Warfare Against Technologically Superior Opponents. Commander Vexthal opened it and found hundreds of pages describing how humans would fight enemies who had better weapons, better ships, and better technology. The strategies all involved making victory so expensive that winning would not be worth the cost. Hit-and-run attacks that could continue for generations. Sabotage that would make occupation impossible. Psychological warfare that would break the enemy's will to fight. "We assume we will usually be outgunned," Dr. Torres said matter-of-factly. "So we specialize in fighting dirty. We make war so terrible and so costly that our enemies wish they had never started fighting us." As the tour ended, Commander Vexthal realized something that made his blood run cold. Everything he had seen was designed by people who expected to lose conventional battles. These humans had spent centuries learning how to win wars they should not be able to win. They had turned desperation into innovation. They had made their weaknesses into strengths. Most terrifying of all, they had done this while still trapped on a single planet, fighting only each other. What would they become when they had access to the resources of an entire galaxy? The final day of the visit brought the alien delegation to the Academy's most important classroom. This room was different from all the others. The walls were covered with maps of star systems, pictures of alien species, and charts showing military strategies. At the center of the room was a large table with a three-dimensional display of the galaxy. Colonel Rita Hayes stood at the front of the room, waiting for them. Her expression was serious, and her eyes held a weight that made Commander Vexthal uncomfortable. Behind her, Director General Marcus Webb entered with several senior staff members. "Today we will discuss humanity's ultimate military philosophy," Colonel Hayes announced. "What you will learn may be disturbing, but it is necessary for you to understand who we really are." The alien delegation took their seats. Dr. Nylarex noticed that all the human cadets in the room had the same look in their eyes. It was not fear or excitement. It was a kind of calm acceptance that was somehow more frightening than any emotion. "We call it the doctrine of last resort," Colonel Hayes began. "It is based on a simple principle. If humanity is going to die, we will make sure our enemies remember the cost of killing us for the rest of their existence." She pressed a button, and the display showed Earth surrounded by enemy ships. The planet was clearly doomed, with no hope of victory or escape. "Scenario 1, Colonel Hayes said. "Earth is invaded by a superior force, our fleets are destroyed, our cities are burning. Defeat is certain. What do we do?" A senior cadet, Mark Wilson, raised his hand. "We activate the Scorched Earth Protocol. If we cannot keep our planet, we make sure the enemy cannot use it either." "Correct," Colonel Hayes nodded. "We destroy everything of value. Factories, farms, power plants, research facilities, even basic infrastructure. The enemy will conquer a dead world that costs more to repair than it is worth." Commander Vexthal felt his stomach drop. The Federation had rules about planetary warfare. Even in defeat, civilizations were supposed to surrender in ways that preserved life and property. The idea of deliberately destroying your own world was unthinkable. But that is only the beginning, Director Webb said, stepping forward. Colonel Hayes, please explain Phase 2. Phase 2 is psychological warfare on a galactic scale, she continued. We make sure every species in the galaxy knows exactly what happened to Earth. We want them to understand that humans do not surrender. We want them to fear what will happen if they attack other human colonies. The display changed to show human settlements throughout the galaxy. Each one was marked with detailed defense plans and evacuation procedures. Every human colony is prepared for this scenario, Colonel Hayes explained. If one colony is attacked, all the others immediately begin preparing for war. Not just military preparation, psychological preparation. Dr. Nylarex leaned forward. What kind of psychological preparation? Captain Beth Foster, who had joined them from the Psychological Operations Division, answered. We teach our civilians to think like soldiers. Parents teach their children that dying for humanity is more important than living for themselves. We create a culture where surrender is literally unthinkable. She showed them videos of human children in schools, learning not just mathematics and science, but also basic military tactics and weapons training. Even very young children were taught to hide, fight, and resist occupation. We prepare our people to continue fighting even after their governments fall and their armies are destroyed, Foster explained. A grandmother with a kitchen knife becomes a soldier. A child with a homemade bomb becomes a weapon. Every human becomes a potential threat that must be watched and guarded. Lieutenant Corvin felt sick. The Federation believed in protecting civilians during war. The idea of turning entire populations into armies was barbaric. Phase 3 is the most important, Director Webb said. Tell them about the generational resistance doctrine. Colonel Hayes nodded grimly. We plan for wars that last longer than human lifetimes. If the first generation cannot win, they teach the second generation to continue fighting. If the second generation fails, they teach the third. We can keep this going for hundreds of years. The display showed detailed plans for underground resistance movements, hidden weapon caches, and secret communication networks. Everything was designed to survive even after complete military defeat. Our children grow up learning the names and faces of their enemies, Colonel Hayes continued. They learn their weaknesses, their fears, their family members. When those children become adults, they continue the war their parents started. Their children do the same. Commander Vexthal realized the horrible truth. Humans did not just plan to resist occupation. They planned to make occupation so costly and so dangerous that their enemies would eventually give up and leave, even if it took centuries. But surely you do not expect civilians to fight trained soldiers, Dr. Nylarex said desperately. We do not expect them to win battles, Captain Foster replied. We expect them to make the enemy's life miserable. A resistance fighter does not need to defeat an army. They just need to make that army wish it was somewhere else. She showed them examples from human history, resistance movements that had continued fighting for decades after their countries were conquered. Civilians who had made life so difficult for occupying forces that the occupiers eventually retreated. The key is patience, Foster explained. We can wait longer than our enemies can. We can endure more suffering than they can inflict. We can hate longer than they can maintain control. Director Webb stepped to the center of the room. His voice became very quiet, which somehow made his words more frightening. There is one more thing you need to understand, he said. Everything we have shown you assumes that we are fighting a rational enemy who can be discouraged. But we also have plans for enemies who cannot be reasoned with. The display changed to show something that made all three aliens step backward. It was a detailed plan for destroying entire star systems. The final protocol, Webb said simply. If humanity faces extinction, we take our enemies with us. We have already identified ways to make stars go supernova. We know how to create artificial black holes. We have designed weapons that can sterilize entire planets. Cadet James Park, who had shown them the mining equipment weapons, raised his hand. Sir, should we explain the mutual destruction contingency? Yes, Webb nodded. Park, tell our guests about your real senior project. Park stood up, his young face completely calm. If humanity is about to become extinct, we activate devices hidden throughout the galaxy. These devices will destroy any planet where our enemies live. Even if they kill every human, their own civilizations will die with us. The alien delegation sat in stunned silence. Dr. Nyler X realized that the mining equipment demonstration had been a lie. These humans had already built planet-killing weapons and hidden them throughout known space. You are insane, Commander. Vexel whispered. No, Director Webb replied calmly. We are desperate. There is a difference. Insane people act without reason. Desperate people will do anything to survive. Colonel Hayes returned to the front of the room. This is what you need to report to the Galactic Federation. Humanity does not want war. We prefer peace and cooperation. But if someone forces us to fight, we will fight in ways that make victory meaningless. She looked directly at Commander Vexthal. We have spent our entire history learning one lesson. It is better to be feared than to be pitied. It is better to be too dangerous to attack than to be too weak to defend ourselves. Captain Foster added the final piece of the puzzle. We have studied every species in the Federation. We know your weaknesses, your fears, your military capabilities. We have already planned how to fight each of you, just in case we ever need to. The room fell completely silent. Commander Vexthal looked around at the human faces surrounding him. These people looked normal. They seemed friendly and reasonable. But they had just calmly explained how they would destroy galactic civilization. If necessary, why are you telling us this? Dr. Nylerex asked in a shaking voice. Director Webb smiled, but it was not a happy smile. Because we want you to understand something very important. Humanity does not want to be your enemy. We would much prefer to be your allies, but that choice is yours to make. If you accept us as equals and treat us with respect, we will be the most loyal friends you could imagine, Colonel Hayes added. But if you treat us as threats or try to control us, we will become exactly the kind of enemy you fear most. The demonstration was over. The alien delegation was escorted back to their ships in complete silence. As they prepared to leave Earth, Commander Vexthal looked back at the blue planet one final time. He understood now why the Federation's preliminary reports had been so confused. Humanity was not just another primitive species seeking membership. They were something entirely different. They were a species that had turned desperation into an art form. As their ships lifted off from Terra Prime Military Academy, Dr. Nylerex was already preparing her report. Her hands shook as she wrote the final recommendation. Humanity must be accepted into the Galactic Federation immediately, she typed. Not because they deserve membership, but because we cannot afford to have them as enemies. They are too dangerous to be left outside our alliance. Commander Vexthal nodded in agreement. They had come to evaluate humanity for membership. Instead, they had learned that humanity was already powerful enough to destroy them all.